Russian influence in Southeast Europe. Are they regaining power? Moderated by Mr. Tim Judah.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very encouraged to see that so many people are here after lunch, because often for a moderator, this is a sort of worrying panel for obvious reasons. But also, I think this is going to be, I hope, one of the most interesting panels. Actually, the question of Russia has already been raised since we started, but obviously here we're going to concentrate on the issue, and we've got a nice panel of experts to do so. Russian influence in Southeastern Europe, regaining power. Well, we've just been talking about this and wonder whether this is deliberately provocative, because we were trying to think, well, actually, like, regaining power, but did Russia ever have any power in this region? Or if it did, it was only very, very briefly, for fleeting periods. So perhaps the question is really about messaging. And let me give you an example, some examples of what I mean by that. It's kind of messaging and perception, I think, as well. People have mentioned the coup attempt that apparently took place here. For many people in this country, obviously many people are convinced, but there's a lot of people in this country who are not convinced that there was a coup attempt that took place here. Apparently there are people who've got lots of good evidence, but a lot of people in this country say that they haven't seen that evidence. So I think, again, this is a question of what I want to talk about. It's a question of perception and messaging. Let me give you another example. I'm one of the few people in this room, probably, who's actually been to this the great Russian spy base that we're often told about in Niš, actually the Russian-Serbian Humanitarian Center in Niš, where if you go as a journalist, you're shown inflatable boats and tents and food parcels and the like, and the director says, and this, he says, laughing, these are the Russian missiles. Well, there's not much to see, I have to tell you. It's a pretty small place, there's not much to see. But I suppose the real issue, this is one of the reasons why there's a quarrel about it and this issue of diplomatic immunity, is not because it actually does very much today, apart from send favourable messages to Serbs, but it's a question of the potential and what could happen there. And I think that a lot of this question about Russia is less what is really happening, or what is happening today. It's to do with potential. Let me give you some other examples of what I mean when it comes to messaging and perceptions. There was a couple of months ago, Gallup released a poll, and it said, do you associate NATO with protection of your country as a threat to your country, or do you see it neither as protection nor threat? Well, a reason I'm mentioning that here is because I think that probably the answers to what people think about NATO are inverse to what they think about Russia. Kosovo and Albania clearly came right at the top of the list. The great majority of people saw NATO as protection. But when you come to Bosnia, it's Bosnia and Herzegovina, 28% see NATO as a protection, 21% as a threat, 38% as neither. Montenegro, 21% see NATO as protection, 29% as threat, 35% as neither. And Serbia, 6% see it as protection and 64% as threat. Again, it's this strange question of getting the message across. Serbia apparently, I'm talking about Serbia in particular here because I just have the data. Serbia apparently does, I may be wrong on this, but I seem to remember 120 exercises a year, or soldiers are involved with 120 exercises of some sort with NATO or Western countries, but only a handful with Russia. But hardly anybody in Serbia or the region knows that. And actually, they also probably don't know that Russia's also not very friendly in some respects. Serbia's greatest single export is the Fiat 500L car, which is specifically excluded from the free trade agreement. So again, this question of understanding what's really happening here, because many people in Serbia, and particularly let's call it loosely, the Orthodox parts of the Balkans tend to have this kind of quite favourable view of Russia, and people in the non-Orthodox parts tend to have a kind of much more hostile view. Well, look, I could just go on, but I think I'm going to stop here. I've got kind of lots more statistics and things, and I can call upon those later on. But you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to our panel. And I'm going to call first on our first panelist is Marina PENDEŠ, Minister of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Well, from your point of view, how does Russia look? Is it a threat? Is it a friendly country, just wants to have a good friendly relationship? Is it neither? Or, as with everything in Bosnia, do you have three views about that?
Zahvaljujem na pitanju. To je jako kompleksno pitanje i zaslužuje ne samo fokusiranje na trenutno stanje, nego moramo malo pogledati, ili bolje rečeno, podsjetit ću vas sve na povijesni aspekt. Obzirom još iz 19. stoljeća postoji panslavenski pokret koji je bio značajan i u 20. stoljeću, i ako uzmemo u obzir da nastajanjem Sovjetskog saveza, nakon toga i bivše Jugoslavije, su postojale određene veze koje su se bazirale i na kulturnoj, na jezičkoj, na sigurnosnoj suradnji, iako je bivša Jugoslavija bila nesvrstana zemlja, a bivši Sovjetski savez je predvodio Varšavski pakt. Moram kazati da u tom periodu ipak Rusija imala određeni utjecaj, ali ne toliko značajan, jer ipak nezavisnost, odnosno bivša Jugoslavija, njena politika je na neki način štitila svoje sopstvene interese od utjecaja, uvjetno rečeno, istoka i zapada. Ali ne može se zanemariti utjecaj Rusije trenutno iz jednostavnog razloga, jer i tokom rata koji je bio više od 20 godina na području jugoistočne Evrope, odnosno raspadom bivše Jugoslavije, moram kazati da je tad u doba Jelcinja Rusija vodila jednu politiku, nazvaću je, nezamjeranja prema zapadu, gdje je zapad pokušao naći rješenje, mirovno rješenje za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, ne samo za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, nego na području bivše Jugoslavije. U tom smislu i tada, znači, Rusija nije bila prijetnja, nego je Rusija bila partner. Možda taj kontekst utjecaja Rusije nakon završetka rata u Bosni i Hercegovini, gdje je značajnu i pozitivnu ulogu, gdje su značajnu i pozitivnu ulogu odigrale Sjedinjene Američke Države, ali i određeni broj zemalja zapadne Evrope, možda nije iskoristila značajno, ili bolje rečeno pružila je priliku zapadu, ja bih rekla Evropi, da ima malo veći utjecaj. U međuvremenu, većina nas u Bosni i Hercegovini, Crnoj Gori, možda i Republici Srbiji i ostalim dijelovima i zemljama jugoistočne Evrope koje su nastale raspadom bivše Jugoslavije, su evropske vrijednosti, evropski put i euroatlantski put vanjsko-politički ciljevi. I u tom smislu smatram da ukoliko zemlja, a to je između ostalog i Bosna i Hercegovina, jasno podcrta šta su njeni vanjsko-politički ciljevi, a mi to jesmo, i kroz zakon o obrani, kroz obrambene i sigurnosne politike, kroz izjave predsjedništva koje vode i vanjsku politiku Bosne i Hercegovine, onda smatram da nijedan utjecaj ne može vam biti prijetnja ukoliko jasno provodite svoju vanjsku politiku. A da netko pokušava, naravno, da ima više utjecaja kroz ekonomski, kulturni, obrazovni sustav, ima, i to i dalje radi ne samo Rusija, nego i druge zemlje Bliskog istoka ili Dalekoga istoka.
Okay, but could you be a little bit more specific about Bosnia's policy today and how you feel Russia's influence today in the country?
Bosna i Hercegovina je kompleksna država, kao što je to kompleksno pitanje. Vi sami znate da Bosna i Hercegovina nema svoj ustav, nego da je Dejtonski ustav, mirovni ustav, gdje je garant između ostaloga i Rusija, naš ustav Bosne i Hercegovine, gdje na državnoj razini nemate vladu, nego imate vijeće ministara, imate dva entiteta, odnosno vlade entitetske, unutar entiteta Federacija Bosne i Hercegovine imate 10 kantona i pored toga, znate, imate distrikt Brčko. Ovisno od utjecaja, ovisno od, ja bih kazala, dnevno-političkih aktivnosti, obzirom da Bosna i Hercegovina svake druge godine je u jednom izbornom procesu, onda je lako u Bosni i Hercegovini bilo kakav utjecaj, pa između ostalog i ruski, iskoristiti u političke svrhe ili u predizborne svrhe kako biste baš zbog toga što podržavate uvjetno rečeno utjecaj Rusije i ne želite biti dio euroatlantskih integracija, dobivate određeni broj glasova. Ali sami ste naveli da tim procentima koji govore o tome da li građani Bosne i Hercegovine daju potporu više NATO ili to smatraju prijetnjom, govori da ipak je značajan procenat, to je vjerojatno ukupni procenat u Bosni i Hercegovini, s tim da je u Federaciji značajan procenat koji podržava NATO, a u Republici Srpskoj možda ipak više ljudi podržava neku drugu neutralnu opciju koja je bliže ovom ruskom utjecaju, ja bih kazala.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to Predrag BOŠKOVIĆ, the Minister of Defense of Montenegro. I see that here it's quite interesting because in the questions that have been set, sort of rather like an exam question, it talks about. It says the third sentence. Russia has been present in the past 10 years. One way it's been present in the past 10 years is economic influence through investments, mostly real estate. It seems to me that. Actually, when we come to, let's talk about Montenegro, actually the fact that Russia was a significant investor in Montenegro, and probably in terms of kind of volume compared to the size of the economy, I would guess bigger than anywhere else in the region, actually that investment hasn't bought them a lot of influence, has it? Because it didn't stop you putting sanctions on Russia, and it hasn't stopped you moving towards NATO. So actually, should we be worried about this investment? In fact, the biggest single investment has ended in complete disaster with the Russian partner and you, I think, suing each other. So actually, this whole question of if there's Russian investments, I mean, well, if they're good investments, they're good investments. If they're bad, they're bad. But should we be worried about it per se, or is this a kind of lot of fuss about nothing? Do you think?
Hvala puno. Prije svega dozvolite ja pozdravim sve moje kolege u panelu, ali naravno veliki broj ljudi koji sluša danas ovaj panel i tema je svakako inspirativna i dozvolite mi na početku da se nadovežem na ovo što je moja kolegica PENDEŠ iz Bosne i Hercegovine kazala, da li je Rusija prijetnja ili nije. Pitanje je svakako kompleksno iz jednog prostog razloga šta se smatra pod prijetnjom, koja vrsta prijetnje. Ako govorimo o spoljno-političkim prioritetima Crne Gore, svakako da je Rusija prijetnja jer se nije slagala sa našim putem prema euroatlantskim integracijama. U početku je to bilo onako jedno, pod navodnicima, stidljivo miješanje, na kraju pred izbore se pretvorilo u jedno brutalno miješanje, a na kraju je to dobilo i svoj oficijalni oblik kroz saopštenja najviših predstavnika vlasti u Rusiji, kroz direktne prijetnje, srećom retoričke, prema Crnoj Gori da Crna Gora postaje i meta obzirom da ulazi u Sjevernoatlantski savez i tako dalje i tako dalje. Tako da, ako gledate sa te strane, svakako jeste prijetnja, ali ono što mogu reći jeste da integracija Crne Gore u Sjevernoatlantski savez apsolutno nije usmjerena protiv Rusije, nije usmjerena protiv bilo koga u regionu, isključivo poštovanje naših ključnih nacionalnih interesa i obezbeđivanje mira i stabilnosti na prostoru ne samo Crne Gore, već kompletnog Zapadnog Balkana. Što se tiče ovog drugog pitanja, dakle, ekonomskih interesa i svega, mi shvatamo i nervozu Rusije i spremni smo i da istrpimo i mnogo jaču retoriku nego što je to normalno u diplomatskoj praksi, upravo poštujući neke veze koje ste i vi napomenuli u vašem uvodnom govoru, jer poznato je da je, htjeli mi to priznati ili ne, Rusija bila prisutna na ovim prostorima i prije 200 godina i više, ali ono što je činjenica jeste da Crna Gora često u svojoj prošlosti nije znala da zaštiti svoje nacionalne interese i upravo priklanjajući se i naivno vjerujući da će iz nekih emocionalnih ili nekih drugih tradicionalnih veza obezbijediti sebi dugovječnost, stabilnost i bezbjednost, nestajala u jednom dugom vremenskom kontinuitetu. Pa se nanovo rađala, pa imamo nezavisnost Crne Gore već skoro 11 godina. Što se tiče ekonomskih interesa, svakako, dakle, vjerovali smo da vrijeme sukoba i prošlosti je iza nas kada je region Zapadnog Balkana. Vjerovali smo da je ekonomija ta koja treba da opredjeljuje rast i razvoj čitavog Zapadnog Balkana. Naravno da smo kao država koja je prije svega građanska, dakle nije ni nacionalna, spremni da otvorimo vrata svima koji su spremni da poštuju zakone Crne Gore i da ovdje nađu plodno tle za ostvarivanje svojih ekonomskih interesa. I naravno to je funkcionisalo dok se nije pokušalo kroz te ekonomske interese uticati na neke druge interese, odnosno uticati na domaću političku scenu u Crnoj Gori. Zbog toga svakako nismo dozvolili da to bude ograničavajući faktor, već naprotiv, znali smo šta su nam prioriteti. Prioritet nam je bio zapisan u Deklaraciji o nezavisnosti koja je usvojena 3. juna 2006. godine. To su dva vanjsko-politička prioriteta. Jedan je integracija u NATO, drugi je integracija u Europsku uniju. Sa ove distance gledajući svakako dobro odabrana dva spoljno-politička prioriteta. Jedan ispunjavamo sad 5. juna, a drugi nadam se u najbližem mogućem vremenskom roku. I to je ono što je prioritet. Sve ostalo, bez obzira kakvi su ekonomski interesi iza i kojih pokušava, i kogod da pokušava, bilo preko ekonomskih ili nekih drugih interesa ostvariti određeni politički uticaj u Crnoj Gori, doći će na zatvorena vrata ako se to kosi sa našim nacionalnim interesima. Dakle, siguran sam da i ovo što se desilo tokom izborne kampanje, pa onda na izborni dan, pa i nakon toga praktično se dešava i u ovom periodu završetka našeg pristupanja NATO-u, je svjedočanstvo da su institucije u Crnoj Gori dosta ojačale, da mogu da se nose sa raznim izazovima i da svako ko bude zloupotrijebljen interno ili sa strane za rušenje tih nacionalnih interesa dobit će odgovor iz institucija sistema, naravno uz puno poštovanje svih zakona koji su u službi Crne Gore.
Going back to my introduction, this question of messaging and communication, do you think that first of all, in this country, you've done as good a job as you could of convincing people that NATO is the correct decision, and that's the first thing. And do you think that you've done do you think in the region in general, and especially, and as I say, I'm kind of using in inverted commas, in the sort of Orthodox parts of the Balkans, amongst Orthodox populations, you've done a good enough job in convincing people that Russia is really out for its own interests, which may not be in their interests?
Postoje svakako osjetljivija pitanja i sa koje se sa pažnjom treba i posmatrati i na njih djelovati. Jedno od tih pitanja je svakako pitanje NATO-a. Razumijemo i one koji u ovom momentu ne vide sve benefite crnogorskog učlanjenja u NATO. Sjećanja su dosta freška i na ono što se dešavalo 1999. godine tokom NATO kampanje, ali morate biti svjesni da u Crnoj Gori još uvijek ima ljudi koji se ne mogu pomiriti ni sa crnogorskom nezavisnošću, a ne sa crnogorskim pristupanjem u NATO. i crnogorsko pristupanje u NATO ruši njihov jedan od ključnih političkih ciljeva, a to je da Crna Gora kad tad ponovo izgubi svoju nezavisnost, a oni za to crnogorsko učlanjenje u NATO vide kao direktnu prijetnju za ostvarenje tog njihovog cilja da Crna Gora opet bude zavisna od nekoga u regionu i tako dalje, tako dalje. Ali sam siguran kako vrijeme bude promicalo da će ideja euroatlantskih integracija u Crnoj Gori dobijati sve više plodno tle među crnogorskom javnošću i to je ono što je neumitno i siguran sam da ovaj historijski zaokret Crne Gore od istoka ka zapadu je jedna od najboljih odluka sa aspekta budućnosti cjelokupnog društva.
All right, I'm just going to ask you one other straight question before we move on to the next panelist. One of the most kind of dramatic events which has taken place in Europe in the last few years has been Russia's annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine, and many Ukrainians. Well, first of all, Ukraine was unprepared, and secondly, and as a consequence, many Ukrainians were amazed that Russia, the country that they were thought of as a brotherly country, had effectively stabbed them in the back. Sitting here in Podgorica, did you think we're the kind of this is a kind of parallel? Serbia is not a threat today, but who knows, in 20 years' time, Serbia could turn into a Russia and stab us in the back and support secessionist movements in the north of Montenegro. Did you have that in the back of your mind in the last few years?
I don't want to make a parallel, of course, in between Russia and Serbia, especially not these days. And of course, but we learned our lessons from the past. And I don't want to mention 1918, when Montenegro lost its independence and existence due to the fact that we believe that somebody who is the closest to us among all ties will not do that, and we didn't expect it. So even this accession to NATO is our guarantee for us, primarily that we will not occur that kind of situation again in our future, no matter from where it comes. I really think that Montenegrin accession to NATO is the end for Greater Albania, Greater Serbia, Greater Croatia, or Greater Montenegro. We will stop this kind of politics, and that's why we think that the future of the whole region, I mean, future of Bosnia and Herzegovina, future of Macedonia, Kosovo and Serbia is in Euro-Atlantic integrations.
Okay, let's move on to our next panelist, Nadezhda Arbatova, head of the Department of European Political Studies at IMEMO. Like, from Moscow, does the Balkans look like an increasingly important area, or like a kind of rather obscure area, or how does it look? Sometimes, I think that sometimes people in the West think that Balkan leaders are experts in, I'm using a term which we use, I don't know if it translates into Russian, as being tails who know how to wag the dogs, and can use the fear of Russia to get something out of the West, and to use the fear of the West to get something out of Russia. I mean, is that the way it looks in Russia, or how does it all look to you?
First of all, let me start with one preliminary remark to explain where we are now. I think that the differences between Russia and NATO and the West at large can be explained by two factors: the uneven end of the bipolarity. I'm not speaking about the Cold War, because the Cold War resulted in the Paris summit. But after the end of bipolarity, nothing of this kind created in the Russia-West relations, but the biggest changes happened in 1991 when two empires collapsed. And the second factor is uneven demises of both empires, the Yugoslav Empire and the Soviet Empire. In practical terms, our differences are revolving around two issues: mutual misperceptions of acceptable foundations of European security. Russia is against NATO's enlargement for a very simple reason, because NATO's enlargement is bypassing Russia. And the second reason is that NATO's enlargement is an open-ended process, and Russia has traditionally been concerned about its impact on the post-Soviet space. As for the Balkans policy of Russia, it has nothing to do with the widespread stereotypes about the Slavic Orthodox brotherhood. Russia's Balkan policy is a regional projection of its foreign policy on a macro level. However, our history, 300 years of good relations between the region and the Tsarist Russia and the Soviet Union, create a kind of a benign environment in some parts of the Balkan region. But as I have already said, it's a regional projection of Russian foreign policy goals. And what is the fundamental foreign policy goal of Russia now? Many politicians argue that Russia's foreign policy under Putin has undergone a substantial change. But in my view, it's not so much the goal of Russian foreign policy, but rather its means that varied from different presidential terms of Putin. And after the collapse of the USSR, the post-Soviet euphoria was replaced with a sense of loss of a big empire and status equal to the United States. It's all the more so since many American politicians were slamming Russia as a regional power losing strength. So the goal of Putin was to reinstate Russia's prestige, to rebuild Russia's international status. Why Balkans is important for Russia? Partly because historically, to be involved in the Balkans and present in the region meant to be a big power, a great power. And secondly, because Russia had and still has its economic interest in the region. But when people in the region are concerned about Russia's potential influence, I think that they should not over-exaggerate Russia's economic potential. Unless EU and NATO remain the guiding stars for the regional states, Russia's chances will be limited in the region.
How much is this region reported and in the press in Russia? In the West, over the last 10 years, it's pretty much disappeared. But interestingly, in the last year or so, especially the last few months, there's like more and more stuff being reported. There's kind of more interest. Partly, I think this is, for example, by what is supposed to have happened here during the election and the accusations that Russia has been behind a coup. I mean, that's not the only reason, obviously, but it just there's like kind of feeling that something's happening here. Is that the case in Russia as well? That it's sort of coming back into the news and coming back into the press?
Well, I think that we should divide Russia's Balkan policy into different periods. Before the Ukrainian conflict, Russia didn't have any strategy in the Balkans. It was focused mostly on economic issues, on the energy cooperation. Politically, it was focused mostly on the Kosovo problem as a reminder of the Western mistakes that had implications for the post-Soviet peace. But the Ukrainian conflict has emerged as a key issue for recasting the balance of power in the region. And you remember that after Russia's incorporation of Crimea, Russia was excluded from the main international formats and fora. And in order to overcome this isolation, Russia started to strengthen its relations with those countries who were dissatisfied with the European Union, with the so-called Eurosceptics.
So-called what, sorry?
Eurosceptics.
Is there a feeling like that after Ukraine, it's a bit like you mess in our backyard, we'll mess in your backyard?
Absolutely. It's like we often compare the current period with the Cold War in terms of tension. And I would say that this policy can be compared, the rivalry between Russia and the West can be compared with the foot in the door policy in the Cold War time.
Okay. Let's move on to you. Yes, to you. Yes, exactly. Senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington. Yes, no, I was just about to say that. I know where you are. It was in Washington. Well, am I right? Are the Balkans suddenly beginning to worry people again in Washington? I mean, I suppose when it comes to Russian influence, you're more concerned about Russian influence in Washington than in the Balkans. It rather puts it into the shade. But how does it look from your point of view?
Tim, before I try and answer that, let me try and answer your first points, because you actually included two arguments which answer each other. Why is support for NATO weaker here than in other parts of Central Eastern Europe? Because of the fact that there wasn't a lot of Russian influence here for many years after World War II. You ask those same questions in the Baltic states or Poland or Romania, you're going to get a very different answer, or even now in Ukraine. To go back to what you say, I would argue it this way. If you're talking about our American system, if the Russians, if the Kremlin is interfering in the American political process, you could imagine how much more leeway and ambition they have in interfering in a place like the Balkans, which they view as Europe's soft underbelly. In other words, all the problems here haven't been resolved, the mission hasn't been accomplished, the region hasn't, as we thought 20-odd years ago, been integrated into all the Western institutions. There are still lingering ethnic tensions, still lingering territorial disputes that can be unearthed, can be ignited. But I think it's important to step back to see the Balkans in a bigger picture, because I do think the Putin regime, and as Mr. Carpenter said earlier, we're not talking about Russia here, we're talking about a specific regime in the Kremlin, which is intent on rolling back the gains that the West has made in the past 25 years. I wrote a book about 7 years ago called Dismantling the West, Russia's Transatlantic Policy. And unfortunately, a lot of this is beginning to be implemented. In other words, particularly through their soft power means, they have a different idea of what soft power is in the EU, by the way, through soft power means, disinformation, through even engineering coup attempts as here, even though you doubt it, we have the intelligence that actually took place, corruption, criminalization, fostering and promoting ethnic conflict. In all these ways, Russia is trying to inject itself in this region. They know they're not going to incorporate this region in some sort of Eurasian Union. But if they deny it to NATO, if they deny it to the European Union, if they create problems for us, distractions for us, they can also in future come in as mediators. In other words, help create a conflict, then come in and inject yourself as a mediator in the conflict. But I think this is part of a grand strategy. The other part of this, of course, is capabilities. I don't think Russia necessarily has the capabilities to achieve what it wants to, but it certainly, under Putin, has the ambitions.
Thank you very much. I wasn't necessarily doubting what had happened at the time of the election, but I was saying that the evidence, I don't think, has been very successfully communicated. Anyway, that's far.
Share intelligence. Sorry? They're not going to share the intelligence with the public in terms of what they know about GRU involvement in a potential coup attempt here. But both American and British intelligence have the evidence.
Do you think, perhaps, though, that we might be falling into a Russian trap by exaggerating their power and influence in this region, by giving them credit for more than they can actually do?
I don't think it's giving them credit. I think it's giving them discredit in what they're trying to do. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful. This is like sharing a microphone, singing, a duo. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful, but I think it's important to unearth what they're up to. And again, going back to your first question, I don't think there's been sufficient education in places like Montenegro or other countries in the West Balkans of what NATO does. NATO is not just a military organization, it's also a political union, it's also a security organization. And I think NATO's task in the future in this region is going to be to try and unearth and counter and deter foreign subversion, whether it's from Russia, whether it's from Islamic terrorism, whatever the source.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go on to Paul Schwartz now. You're an senior associate at CSIS, the Russia and Eurasia program, and also research analyst at CNA. Can you just remind, CNA stands for?
Center for Naval Analysis.
I've got a specific question for you before we start. No one ever mentions, or very rarely they mention, when it comes to this whole issue of NATO accession to Montenegro, the Bay of Kotor, which was, after all, an Austro-Hungarian naval base, a Yugoslav naval base. I know that by joining NATO, it's a kind of denial to anybody else who might like to use it. Obviously, I'm thinking about Russia here and closing off the sort of last gap between Lisbon and Turkey on this shore of the Mediterranean. But could Kotor Bay, do naval analysts look at Kotor Bay and think, wow, that could be really useful one day, or we should use that?
Yes, absolutely. The fact that Montenegro's accession to NATO, which I want to congratulate them for, by the way, did actually deny the ability of the Russian Federation to use that base and related bases for naval refueling exercises, for potential restocking and resupply missions, which they had been very interested in just a couple of years ago during the height of the Syrian crisis, when the situation in Syria was quite uncertain, and it was unclear whether the Russians would be able to retain their naval base at Tartus, and they started to explore other options, including Cyprus, Greece, and the base in Montenegro. And from some reports that I have seen, the Russians made a quite generous offer to try to get basing rights at one point to use facilities within Montenegro. And thinking that having invested so heavily in Montenegro and having maintained such good relations over the years, that Montenegro may be open to this, even though it was expressly in conflict with its stated desire to become a member of NATO. So ultimately, it turned out that Russia was able to turn the tide in Syria. They have, at least for the moment, they do look poised to be able to maintain control of the naval base in Tartus. They're already investing now to try to increase the number of docks and floating ports available to service their ships. And we've also seen when Russia moved its carrier into the Mediterranean to launch so-called airstrikes on Syria, that despite the fact of having been denied access to refueling, they were able to pull that off anyway. There were other problems with that mission, but no need to go into that at this point. So it is, I think, one of the key contributions for Montenegro, though, to be able to basically deny the Russians access to the Adriatic, to create potential basing options that we've seen in the Baltic Sea. When you look at Kaliningrad and what is going on there, somewhat different situations because that's Russian territory. Here it's foreign territory with basing rights and certain restrictions, but theoretically, had they had a base that they could mount military, install military equipment, that could have been a problematic scenario.
Okay. Let's just carry on a little bit. I think, Nadezhda, I'd like to come back to you, since you are the only Russian on this panel, and it is obviously extremely important and interesting to hear what the view is from Moscow. On June the 5th, barring anything unforeseen, of course, Montenegro will become a member of NATO. After that, will Russia kind of lose interest in Montenegro, or will it redouble its efforts to support anti-NATO parties and groups here, or will it concentrate on other areas? What do you think will happen after Montenegro's NATO accession? Yeah, I'm asking you because you're the only person who knows what people think in Moscow anyway, the only Russian here who can tell us.
Unlike the red lines drawn by Russia in the post-Soviet space, in the Caucasus crisis and in Ukraine, Russia cannot block NATO's enlargement in the region. But it will try to retain her presence in the region, mostly in economic sphere, and so it will be, I would say, it will be economization and bilateralization of Russia's Balkan policy. But of course, Russia cannot roll back the process of NATO's enlargement in the region.
Well, why not? I mean, the opposition parties here say that if they come to power, they would have a referendum on the NATO question. I mean, that would be something. If I was in Moscow, I would happily finance those campaigns. Would you think that's not realistic, or what?
If it happens, it will be not because of Russia's efforts and attempts, but because of regional developments. If the regional countries are dissatisfied with NATO or European Union, the situation will be different. But Russia doesn't have any potential to block NATO's membership of the regional countries.
No, but it can't block it now, but it could help roll it back in the future, perhaps.
How?
by helping parties which are against the parties in Montenegro which are against NATO accession, say that if they come to power, they would have a referendum and they would leave NATO if that referendum was successful.
So the problem
and Russia could finance that.
The problem is not with Russia, but with deep divides inside, within societies in the region. It's not, nobody could drive a wedge in the region if there are no reasons for divide.
No, but you can help. I mean, everyone can help by financing political campaigns. I mean,
well, again, a great deal will depend on solidarity of the regional states.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
On stability, resilience of the regional states. How can Russia drive a wedge if the majority of population in these countries are in favor of NATO's or EU membership?
Well, I mean, realistically, we've been talking the last months about Russian influence in the US elections, Russian influence possibly in supporting people in Britain to do with Brexit, and Russian influence which appears to have failed in France. I mean, we're talking about possible future influence operations, aren't we?
Well, I would be the last person who would justify Russia's foreign policy in its every aspect, but on the other hand, you should not demonize Russia. Russia's cyber attacks, if they took place, would have never changed the result of the American election if there was no disappointment with the establishment in the United States.
Okay.
And if we admit that the cyber attacks of Russia against the Clinton's election stuff took place, they didn't change the results of election because she got more votes than Trump. It was the specific American political system that helped Trump to become president.
Okay, well, let's not get too far into Trump. I mean, Mr. BOŠKOVIĆ, do you think that June the 5th is a done deal and that's it? Or do you think, is it a possibility that if the opposition, which is against NATO accession, comes to power, that it would hold a referendum and take Montenegro out of NATO again? After all, in a different way, we've seen that in Britain with Brexit. Could you have a sort of Mont-exit from NATO if the opposition came to power?
Dakle, mislim da u životu je sve moguće.
So, okay.
Tako da, jeste ovo meni pitanje postavili? Sorry. Did you ask me?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Dakle, u životu je sve moguće. Države su nastajale i nestajale. Tako i savezi su mogući da nastanu ili nestanu. Čak i pojedinačno učešće u tim savezima je promjenljivo. Ali ono što želim kazati jeste da je ovo proces koji će teško biti reverzibilan. Tako da, iz više razloga. Mislim da je i opoziciji laknulo kada je Crna Gora usvojila zakon o ratifikaciji protokola 28. aprila ove godine. I sa te strane sam siguran da i kad bi jednog dana opozicija došla na vlast u Crnoj Gori, da se pitanje NATO-a sigurno ne bi postavilo kao primarno pitanje, jer je od njihovog, i oni znaju da je od njihovog najvećeg interesa, makar za veliki dio opozicije, da NATO bude tu i jer NATO znači sigurnost ne samo za državu, već i za njihove porodice koje oni predstavljaju u toj nekoj mogućoj budućoj vlasti. Dakle, to je prvo pitanje. Zato smatram da taj proces koji se sada završava 5. je, kao što ste vi kazali, done deal. Ono što je na nama jeste da sada nastavimo sa tim zahtjevnijim dijelom puta. Dakle, ova faza formalnog učlanjenja se završava, ona je nekako lakši. Uradili smo zaista veliki posao na planu reforme bezbjednosnog sektora, vladavine prava, borbe protiv organizovanog kriminala i korupcije. Da to nismo uradili, sigurno ne bi zavrijedili pažnju naših prijatelja iz alijanse. Ali ono što je sad pred nama jeste da, preuzimajući obaveze iz tog ugovora, pokažemo i da smo spremni da to što smo usvojili primjenjujemo na terenu. Mi smatramo da jesmo i siguran sam da ćemo to i pokazati našim kolegama, a opet ponavljam, da bi kompletan proces bio zaokružen, on ne smije da se završi sa Crnom Gorom. Dakle, on mora da nastavi i dalje da se širi, dakle proces, odnosno NATO, jer to će značiti bezbjednost čitavog regiona. Kada region nije ujedinjen, on će uvijek biti izvor nestabilnosti, a izvor nestabilnosti svakako najviše će osjetiti zemlje u regionu, ali sam siguran da neće biti pošteđene ni zemlje koje su udaljenije od samog regiona Balkana, jer to je najočigledniji primjer Sirije, gdje je Evropa imala nesagledive posljedice od konflikta u Siriji, koji je miljama ili hiljadama milja daleko od prostora zapadnog Balkana. Zato opet ponavljam da je to prioritet i Crne Gore kao jedne od najmanjih članica NATO-a, ali sam siguran da je prioritet i ostalih članica NATO-a, jer će to značiti dugoročnu stabilnost ovog regiona koji je praktično nikad u svojoj istoriji nije imao dugoročnu stabilnost.
Well, Mrs. PENDEŠ, how realistic is it that this NATO umbrella will extend, well, not NATO umbrella because it's already there in Bosnia, but Mr. BOŠKOVIĆ was talking about kind of further steps of enlargement of NATO. Do you see Bosnia joining NATO ever?
Yes, I see.
Okay.
I work very hard together with... ja radim dugo vremena zajedno sa ljudima koji su između ostalog ovdje iz Ministarstva obrane kako bi Bosna i Hercegovina ispunila jedan od dva strateška vanjsko-politička cilja, a to je priključenje u NATO, iako moram kazati da imamo puni konsenzus za aktiviranje mapa. Još uvijek nemamo puni konsenzus u cijeloj Bosni i Hercegovini za pristupanje NATO-u, imamo, ali pod uvjetom da bude referendum. No, ujedno, paralelno sa našim radom Ministarstvo obrane, Ministarstvo sigurnosti, Ministarstvo inozemnih poslova, radimo na pristupanju Evropskoj uniji. Sami smo, malo prije gospodin kazao, da NATO savez nije samo obrambeni, on je i politički savez. Bilo koja zemlja u tranziciji ili zemlja Istočne Evrope koja je postala članica Evropske unije, to nije postala dok nije postala članica NATO-a. I u tom smislu, ja samo se želim nadovezati na svog kolegu BOŠKOVIĆa, znači svi oni i euroskeptici ili NATO skeptici, kad jednom država postane članica NATO-a, to nije samo stvar sigurnosti i stabilnosti, to su usvajanje novih vrijednosti, vladavine prava, demokracije, zaštite ljudskih prava, ali je sve to izvrsna osnova za investiranje. Mi smo sad suočeni sa možda najvećim problemom, ne samo u Bosni i Hercegovini, nego cjelokupno u regiji, sa odljevom mozgova, ja ću to tako kazati, mladih, obrazovanih ljudi. A samim članstvom u NATO savezu, ja mislim da je to izvrsna poruka mladom čovjeku, ali isto tako investitorima izvan, da vrijedi investirati. Mislim da su to vrijednosti oko koji se trebamo svi okupiti. Mir, stabilnost i investiranje i ekonomski razvitak nema alternativu za cjelokupnu regiju. Iako postoje određene političke nesuglasice ili bolje rečeno političke različito viđenje na koji način treba izgledati ovaj dio jugoistoka Europe, ja mislim da Evropska unija, odnosno proširenje NATO i otvorena vrata, kao što smo i danas čuli, nemaju alternativu ni za jednu od ovih zemalja nastali raspadom bivše Jugoslavije.
All right. Thank you very much. Before we open it up to questions, I'm going to come back to you, Mr. SCHWARTZ. The US was obviously crucially important here in the 90s, and it appeared, well, it had other issues, it appeared to sort of withdraw. We heard Ms. Cooper this morning from the Department of Defense. She was being quite defensive and saying, well, it's actually continuity. Now, under this new administration, which hasn't obviously kind of settled down, how do you see the future when it comes to the way the US engages with this region, or is it, as somebody said this morning, like too early to tell?
Well, I think we see positive signs, despite the concerns that emerged during the election campaign about President Trump's commitment or lack of commitment to NATO. I think now that he's settled into the position, he's had a chance to grapple directly with some of the issues. He's getting good advice from a very sound leadership cadre, especially in the national security area. He is recommitting to the NATO alliance. He's recommitting to the idea of Westernization. I'm quite positive that the U.S. will stay involved and will continue to increase its involvement in the region. We've already seen some developments as a result of the previous two NATO summits, Wales and Warsaw, where there has been some strengthening of U.S. military presence in Romania and in some of the other areas in the region. Now, I must say, though, that I don't necessarily agree that we have had continuity throughout this entire period. Might take some exception to that. At one point during the peak period following the wars of the 1990s, we had thousands and thousands of troops in the region providing the stabilization needed to tamp down the ethnic conflicts and to prevent a recurrence. Now, over time, that force has been drawn down substantially, and basically in Kosovo and in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and in other places, to the point where you had a fairly minimal footprint still sufficient, in my view, to prevent the kinds of worst excesses from reemerging. But you lost part of the incentive, the stick, as it were, to try to contain some reemergence of ethnic conflict in the region. And you have seen some troubling signs with things like the train incident that happened in Serbia not too long ago. You've seen statements in Macedonia about wanting to unify with Kosovo. You've seen statements in Kosovo about implementing an armed force despite certain hesitation to do that. Which left, if you remove the carrot, then what you have left is the stick, then what you have left is the carrot of EU accession, which has been trying to do almost too much to try to resolve some of the ethnic and lingering regional security problems, at the same time to act as an incentive for reform in the region. So I do think that the reinvigoration of having a U.S. security presence, increased NATO presence, even if it's a moderate level, reinvigorating and recommitting to the concept of EU accession, renewing the European perspective, all of that should have a very salutary effect in restarting the drive to pursue the internal reforms, to tamp down on some of the internal ethnic conflict, to tamp down on some of the regional conflict, and I'm pretty positive about those developments.
Well, okay, we're going to open it up to questions. If anyone wants to ask something about, I'm kind of open to people who want to sort of question kind of the drift of the way we've been going. I mean, I this morning was raising this question about, in a way, whether we've been fighting yesterday's wars and that the real wars of the future are going to be cyber wars, and whether enough is being done here and whether NATO and the countries here are doing enough. And I'm thinking of there have been, obviously in the past two or 3 years, there have been attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure, and I've just seen an alert now saying that hospitals in England have been under a massive cyber attack today. So if hospitals in England go offline or are being disrupted, what could happen if somebody wanted to attack critical infrastructure in this region? But I'm just sort of throwing that out. So anyway, who would like to open it up? Mr. Vlahovic, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former ambassador in Washington, please.
Thank you, Tim. Hear me. Thank you, Tim. As always, you are an excellent moderator. Congratulations. I have a very brief comment and a question from my dear friend, Mr. BUGAJSKI, Janusz. The comment is a very simple one. I think that our Russian friends, long story short, were just late in addressing the issue of Montenegrin orientation towards NATO. They were late in understanding what is going on. They were late in addressing in proper measure, and they probably have chosen wrong people to promote their interests in our country. Although, as we have heard this morning, it's too early to address what is the historic impact of French Revolution, so it's probably too early to complete the analysis what was going on in between Moscow and Podgorica from 1997 on, because there were different stages, different periods, love and hate, and ignoring Montenegrin orientation or pretending that there is no Euro-Atlantic orientation of ours and so on and so forth. So, but all's well, that ends well. And my question is going to Janusz, admiring his work and his articles and of course his books and the long-term effort to explain to Americans and to Europeans and to Balkan people what is going on here. I don't believe, and I do agree with Janusz and others, that the Russian influence will not be ended with Montenegrin accession to NATO, neither in the context of Montenegro nor in the context of Western Balkans. So, Janusz, what would be your list of potential crises provoked or incentivized or created by Kremlin and Kremlin policy for years to come in Western Balkans? My order, talking by country, would be Serbia, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro. And I think that one of the immediate or the instant impact of our NATO accession is the fact that we are actually at the bottom of that list for years to come. Thank you.
I was going to say, let's get to take two more questions. And then we'll come. There's a gentleman over there at the back.
Hello, everybody.
Please tell us who you are.
We got acquainted so far. I'm Seren Djerdje. I'm come from Kosovo, and I have 3 questions actually. One is for you, Tim. Thank you for leading this panel. You wrote a number of books on Kosovo, Serbia, stories from Ukrainian war and in the region. I want to ask you the same question that you asked us. What happens if the influence of Russia and these cyber attacks continue in the Balkans? How do you see it? To all of you, what are the balances of influence in Southeastern Europe between United States and Russia versus Russia? And to Mr. Schwartz, I follow you on CSIS, and you do a lot on the eastern part of the world. My question is, what will happen if there's no support for Southeastern Europe as we want it and as we need it until now? A special focus in Kosovo.
All right, one more. Would anyone like to ask a third question? Would anyone like to ask a third question? Yes, gentleman there.
Ja sam Esad Aslani iz Makedonije. Pitam predstavnike iz Rusije, da li pomaže Makedoniju za ovu diktaturu preko Srbije?
Excuse me. Hello. Just 1 second. Hello. Hello. Because the translator was having a little bit of difficulty to hear you. The translator. So could you just repeat the question?
Da li Rusija pomaže Makedoniju preko Srbiju za diktaturu što je vladio 15 godina?
Maybe I can help. I suppose that gentleman wanted to ask that question to our ladies from Russia. Is Russia supporting dictatorship in Macedonia through Serbia?
Okay, well let's start with that. Would you like to address the question from about Macedonia to start with? Did you understand it? Did you?
I was going to ask Macedonia in answer to what Mitra was asking.
Did you understand the question? And do you?
No, I didn't understand the question.
I'm sorry, the lady didn't understand your well, Janusz, why don't you address it if you understood what the gentleman was
Yeah,
saying?
I'll address it in a second in relation to what Mitra was saying. Thanks very much, Mitra. A couple of things I would say. With regard to Montenegro, you need to continue to be careful here. And a very good example which occurred during our discussion, I whispered to you, is Bulgaria, where despite the fact that Bulgaria is already in NATO, Russia, through media, energy, corruption, criminality, political influence, use of historical mythology, has tried to re-inject itself into Bulgarian decision-making vis-à-vis NATO. And in fact, because of this, Bulgaria has been lukewarm on hosting NATO force, a Black Sea force, which Romania has been very supportive of. So I would be careful, but I don't think necessarily Montenegro is top of the list, as you said. There's Bosnia, of course, which my colleague can answer probably much better. But one country you did miss is Macedonia. Up until a few years ago, I would say even up until 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, there wasn't a lot of Kremlin interest in Macedonia. It's a landlocked nation. They recognized it. Greece was keeping it sufficiently off balance that it wasn't going to join NATO and the EU. And remember, we haven't talked about the Greek-Russian relationship, which is another, let's say, alliance of sorts. But now they've injected themselves in the Macedonian political scene. And I think this goes to what you're saying. When you say to support the dictatorship, I presume you mean the VMRO government, the previous government, which has been accused of wiretapping other scandals. Paradoxically, Russia, who initially called Macedonia a NATO project, together with Bosnia and Kosovo. Now they're saying America's trying to undermine Macedonian national integrity by supporting the Pan-Albanian project. So the contortions in Russian propaganda are quite phenomenal. but it buys them some support somewhere. It buys them now support amongst these patriotic organizations that have been established by some radical elements in Vimero, who we saw them storm the parliament building in Skopje a couple of weeks ago. Russia's going to continue to play not only in the political divisions in Macedonia, but what I think is even more dangerous, on the ethnic divisions. To raise the ethnic factor, this ghost, this phantom of Pan-Albanianism, this idea that Macedonia is endangered from all sides. Watch this space, this is not over. Russia's going to continue to play this game.
About these contortions, I'd just like to add that you've got the irony of Russia supporting the most a party which has always been extremely pro-NATO. I mean, for all its other faults, it was always it was very clear that it was a sort of right of centre pro-NATO party. So for Moreau, so you've got. Well, this is a kind of irony of the situation.
Although some would say that the Vimero leadership, since Trajkovski's unfortunate death, has been talking about NATO membership, but prefers in a way to be blocked because then can raise the spectre of Macedonian nationalism vis-à-vis Greece in particular, and playing on this nationalist theme. In other words, also if you enter NATO and the EU, presumably the standards of transparency, rule of law are going to apply to you. If you're outside, they're not going to apply to you to the same extent. You can get away with much more in terms of criminality.
Question which was directed to me, if I understood it correctly, all I'm saying was that, well, you mentioned Serbia, you mentioned Kosovo, and Mr. Vučić, the Serbian Prime Minister, garnered a lot of attention in the Serbian press when Russia recently gave it 6 old MiG planes. But at the end of the day, if you're not taking care of your cyber stuff, you won't be able to fly them. As simple as that. That's why I was beginning to think about a little bit about fighting yesterday's wars. New wars are going to be, they're not going to be completely different, as we've seen from Ukraine, but there'll be different layers of conflict. Anyway, I don't know if anyone else wants to pick up something. Yes, go ahead. Speak close to the microphone. Just close to the.
Well, I understood that the question about Russia and Macedonia was kind of rhetorical question. Russia, like any Kremlin, not Russia, Kremlin, like any other leadership in the world, will be supporting those political leaders who are friendly to Russia. And since Russia's interest is to oppose NATO's enlargement, be it in the Soviet space or in the Balkans, Russia will be supporting anti-NATO forces in the regional country.
But as we're saying, the irony in Macedonia is that Russia is supporting a pro-NATO party, which is a sort of great irony of the situation.
But on the other hand, Macedonia and probably Serbia are the only countries who did not join anti-Russian sanctions, which was very important.
And Bosnia, actually. You didn't join sanctions either, as happened.
Probably not.
No, probably not.
No.
Okay. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there, otherwise we'll ask for some more questions. So yes, go ahead.
I think I was asked a specific question about what would happen if there is no support of the kind that we anticipate for the region. Well, I think this gives me an opportunity to go back to the beginning and discuss the nature of the Russian threat. And it is important, I think, to realize that the Russian threat in southeastern Europe is quite different from the Russian threat in its near abroad. In the principal sense that this is, in the near abroad, Russia resorted to the use of military force, both in Georgia as well as in Ukraine, despite some surface level resemblances to some of the hybrid war tactics that have been used in southeastern Europe. There are some similarities, some surface similarities. But the fight in Ukraine, especially, was about use of military power as a direct instrument for coercive control over the Kiev regime to get them to allow to A, cede Crimea, and B, to allow the ethnic regions pro-Russian regions in the Donbass region to survive, despite the fact that Kiev had undertaken a major military offensive to try to crush it. So in the Southeastern Europe and the Balkans, by contrast, military force, although it's still a part of Russia's toolkit, it's much more in the background. To be sure, Russia does threaten certain countries in Southeast Europe, military directly with its own power. For example, the EPAA missile site that is located in Romania. Russia has said that it is going to target that. So in the event of a future conflict, that could be struck because Russia views that as a threat to its theater and strategic nuclear deterrent. Russia has also built up a substantial A2AD umbrella in the Black Sea, which theoretically could support offensive action, but its principal purpose is anti-access area denial to try to protect the approaches to the Russian mainland. The Syrian operation has given pause to the southern maritime portions of Southeast Europe because we've seen that Russia does now have the precision strike capability to reach into Southeast Europe. But essentially, aside from those, what you're dealing with here is primarily, I'll mirror what my colleague Mr. BUGAJSKI said, is soft power tools, not soft power in the sense of the West, where there's an attraction that is drawing countries to join the EU and NATO to try to replicate the miracle of economic and political development, but soft power in the sense of using a variety of economic, diplomatic, and political tools to co-opt either countries or factions within countries to try to maintain a footprint and expand its influence in the region. So, long way of getting to your answer, but essentially if we don't address that, then we could see a Russia with increased power within the region, an increased footprint, supporting groups that are acting in ways contrary to the local interests as well as the interests of the broader Western community, feeding corruption, stoking ethnic conflict, stoking regional conflict, discrediting the West by claiming that the EU is a failure and that NATO is a threat directly. And so you'll have a situation of much less stable Southeast Europe than you would if we did not address these issues directly.
Okay, thank you. Nadezhda, please. And then we're going to open it up. Go ahead.
I would like to react to your comment. Russia, after Ukraine, Russia is being portrayed as a status quo breaker, as a country that has violated the post-bipolar status quo. But saying this, we should define the starting point for the definition of status quo. What is the post-bipolar status quo? Is it the end of bipolarity? Is it NATO's decision to enlarge eastward? Is it military intervention of NATO in 1999? Is it the Caucasus crisis? Or is it Ukraine? And you have said that Russia used military forces in Ukraine. Putin recognized that Russian volunteers were there. But let us not forget that the first military intervention in the region was in 1999. And it was the first war in the post-bipolar period in a European state.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I mean NATO's airstrike against Yugoslavia.
Yes. Okay.
So it was the first case of the military intervention after it's not Russia who started this process of military intervention. And having created precedents like military intervention in 1999, like Kosovo's independence, the West never thought that these precedents can be used by other states, Russia has created a new precedent in Ukraine, and it also can be used by other states. But I'm trying to look at the regional picture from above. So, of course, it's very tempting to put the bulk of responsibility on Russia. But in Russian eyes, it's not Russia who violated the status quo. It was the United States and European allies in 1999. They started the process of NATO's enlargement, which violated the post-bipolar status quo. And Russia followed this example. And the predominant opinion in Russia, it's not the official explanation of the origins of the Ukrainian conflict, which are dictated by high politics. They're very simple. If the United States has a right to change regimes and use military force 1,000 miles away from their territory, why Russia cannot do the same in its immediate neighborhood when Russia's national interests are threatened?
So do you think that Russia was trying to change the regime here? I'm not asking whether you approve it. I'm just saying, do you think that Russia was?
I don't think so. But the post-Soviet space is a special sphere for Russia. And in my point of view, neither Russia nor the West can stabilize this space without each other, only together. And unfortunately, many opportunities were lost after the end of the bipolar.
Okay, I think we could talk about this for another couple of weeks. So, but I don't want to do that, and I want to open up some more questions. Yes, gentleman there.
Hello, I have a question for the speaker.
Please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Besim Saliu from Kosovo. And I have a question regarding the comparing two cases, Kosovo and Ukraine. Can you please describe me similarities between Crimea and Kosovo? Thank you.
Okay. Let me just ask if anybody else. Let me just get two more questions. Okay, you've got 3 seconds. Okay, Janusz, go ahead and then. Janusz, but that was specifically for Nadezhda. You go ahead and then Nadezhda.
Okay, Nadezhda can take over after me. Russia has used the Crimean question, not as the Kosovo question, not as a precedent, but as a pretext. The two situations were radically different between, if you compare Crimea and Kosovo. In Kosovo, remember, we had an attempted genocide by a government that was internationally sanctioned, the Milosevic regime, that had already perpetrated mass murders in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia, that was now expelling and murdering particularly the Albanian population of Kosovo. The intervention, which came belatedly, which came late, after many, many warnings, wasn't intended to, at that point, to tear Kosovo away from Serbia. The idea was to prevent further mass murder in the middle of Europe, a potential genocide. Crimea, by contrast, and Tim knows very well, there was no conflict in Crimea. There was no let's say, massive human rights violations in Crimea. Crimea had actually autonomous status within Ukraine before the Russian intervention. This was a purposeful, engineered annexation exercise by Russian special forces. If I could add also to Donbass, and you know this, Donbass wasn't a local insurgency against the Kiev government. It was incited by Russian special forces, so-called volunteers that were sent by GRU and FSB and other Russian services. So trying to recruit local people, trying to engineer a war. Where did these guys get all the weapons? Where did they get the logistics? This all came from Russia. I would call it a proxy insurgency, very different to what was happening in Kosovo.
That question was specifically for you. Nadezhda, please pick it up.
Well, I don't think that we can compare Kosovo and Crimea. They are two completely different cases. And I said that with Crimea, Russia created her own precedent. We can compare Kosovo with South Ossetia and Abkhazia. They are absolutely similar, these two cases. But I would like to say that all post-communist conflicts have three dimensions. And with all local peculiarities, there is a lot of striking similarities. First, the first dimension is domestic, internal problems inherited from the past. Second, post-imperial dimension. And the third is international dimension. The post-bipolar euphoria was replaced with rivalry between the big powers. But Crimea and Kosovo are completely different cases. We cannot compare them.
Okay, if anyone wants to pick it up, do you want to say anything? Yes, go ahead.
Dakle, mogu da razumijem svakako da je teško prihvatiti činjenicu da u ovom slučaju gospođa rekla da ona ne vjeruje da je u Crnoj Gori pokušan nasilna promjena vlasti i pogotovo pokušaj ubistva tadašnjeg premijera, ali ono što i mogu da razumijem da je to teško prihvatiti sa distance sa koje ona posmatra situaciju, dakle iz perspektive Moskve jer tamo živi i tako dalje. Ali u suštini mi smo i nakon 16. oktobra u jednom, doduše kratkom vremenskom periodu, imali nedoumicu nekih naših značajnih partnera da se tu zaista desilo to što se desilo. Ali onog momenta kada su činjenice prezentovane, više nije bilo nedoumice oko toga da se kod naših partnera, kada su razmijenjene obavještajne informacije i tako dalje, dakle, da se tu zaista desilo nešto opasno, nešto što je neprihvatljivo u 21. vijeku da zemlja toliko puta veća od jedne male Crne Gore pokuša da svoje interese pokuša sprovesti na najbrutalniji način. Nažalost, naišla je na plodno tle u Crnoj Gori kod pojedinih političkih subjekata, ali sam siguran da kada institucije sistema sprovedu sve ono što je do njih, da će ta istina izaći na vidjelo i da će se dokazi svakako prezentovati javnosti ono što danas nije moguće. Mi smo imali informaciju čak još prije 1,5 dana da nakon te 2013. koju su danas ovdje pominjali da je zvanična Rusija je zaista toliko ljuta na Crnu Goru da je spremna da najbrutalniji način se umiješa u nasilnu promjenu vlasti i da će do toga doći prvom zgodnom prilikom. Naravno, prva zgodna prilika su bili izbori u Crnoj Gori, iako to možda u početku je teško nekome bilo i s naše strane povjerovati, ipak smo to i najdirektnije osjetili. Ono što želim da kažem, više puta se ovdje, vi ste to dobro kazali, termin Rusija se poistovjećuje sa zvaničnom politikom Rusije. Dakle, opet ponavljam, Rusija je jedna velika zemlja narod koji je svakako, koji doživljavamo u Crnoj Gori kao prijateljski, sa kojim želimo da sa tim narodom da ostanemo u najboljim mogućim odnosima, ali ono što sigurno Crna Gora neće dozvoliti jeste da se iz Moskve upravlja Crnom Gorom i da se opredjeljuje, da Moskva opredjeljuje koji su to nacionalni interesi Crne Gore. I mislim da smo to do sada pokazali i svakako pokazivat ćemo, jer ono što želimo i čemu smo opredjeljeni je svakako poštovanje vrijednosti otvorenog društva gdje se poštuju ljudska prava i gdje je demokratija prvi i osnovni izbor kada treba donositi neke od krucijalnih odluka.
Great. I think we've got time for like one more question. Would anyone like to ask one final question?
Yeah, you said.
No, I didn't say this. No.
Oh, sorry.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Then I misunderstood.
No, you misunderstood me. I didn't.
But he asked, do you believe?
I didn't address the topic of this plot against Montenegro leadership, but I think that this question is not for academic, it's not for academic analysis. It's a question of pure knowledge. I don't have this knowledge. I don't know concrete facts. I read in the newspapers, in internet, that there were attempts of alleged coup d'etat cooked by Russia. But I don't have concrete knowledge of this fact. So I never addressed this topic.
Okay, well, we've got time for, like, what was that, one more question? No? Like, okay, fine. Would any of you would like to kind of make some final comments?
Maybe just one comment, and it pertains to NATO. Nadia said that NATO expanded through Central and Eastern Europe. It makes it sound as though NATO leaders got together and said, "We're going to, whatever you want, we're going to bring you into this organization because we want to threaten Russia." Now that's putting really the cart before the horse. These countries were clamoring to enter NATO. The Baltic states, the Central European, Visegrad states, even Bulgaria, that Russia was threatening at some point for entering NATO, decided that they're not going to be threatened, they're going to enter. So the process, the way Moscow puts the process, is somehow NATO is enlarging to Russia's border. No, countries are freely choosing which security organization they're going to belong to. And it's the independent right of every country to do that, including Montenegro and including its neighbors.
All right, so just ask you, yes, then that's your last comment, and then I'm going to ask through. But go ahead.
Yes, about NATO's enlargement. I never believed in NATO's aggression, never. But I was against NATO's enlargement because I understood that it would be used by those politicians in Russia who are not interested in good relations between Russia and the West, which happened. And we heard many times that you should not be scared, it's a friendly alliance which is approaching close to your borders. You mentioned Kaliningrad. If you look at the map, it looks really scary for the Baltic space. The military deployment of Russian military forces in the region on the border with the Baltic states, I can understand them. But if you look at the balance of conventional forces between Russia and NATO, it looks scary for Russia. It looks really scary for Russia. And I wanted to say something more about Russia. Russia can be either ally, as it was after 9/11 in anti-terrorist coalition, or opponent. It cannot be neutral. It's too big a country to be neutral. And I think that we are interested, all of us, to have Russia as an ally. And a great deal will depend not only on Russian liberals, but on the West as well. We should draw lessons from our mistakes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you each a quick question for you. The truth is that although you would like to join NATO, there's no mainstream political parties in Republika Srpska who would ever let you do that, and that, therefore you won't ever join NATO. That's my question.
Jako je bitno da postoji puni konsenzus oko priključenja Bosne i Hercegovine Evropskoj uniji. A obzirom da je NATO i politički i obrambeni savez, ja uopće ne sumnjam da u momentu kad ispunimo preduvjete, a sami smo se opredijelili za NATO i za Evropsku uniju, da ćemo time ispuniti preduvjete za priključenje NATO-u i imati konsenzus i potporu cjelokupnog stanovništva. Tako da ne sumnjam i ne vidim nikakav negativan utjecaj od strane Rusije. Ne očekujem.
Well, Russia aside, I don't see how a party could come to power in Republika Srpska agreeing to join NATO. And they have a veto on it.
Znači, u Republici Srpskoj određeni broj političkih partija, u stvari, većina političkih partija iz Republike Srpske podržava aktiviranje MAP-a. Ne podržava članstvo u NATO, ukoliko se ne održi referendum ili ukoliko Srbija ne postane članica NATO-a, iskazuje želju. Ali, obzirom da je NATO daleko, znači na nama koji predstavljamo vlast u Bosni i Hercegovini, pa tako i Republici Srpskoj, je da poduzmemo sve kako bismo na adekvatan način približili koje su to vrijednosti koje dobivamo s članstvom u NATO-u, članstvom u Evropskoj uniji, tako da i taj referendum, ukoliko dođe do njega, ne bude upitan sa aspekta priključenja euroatlantskim integracijama.
Okay. What, have you got something else to say? Like, you want to say something else? Because we're running, because I wanted to...
Just several words.
Just very quickly, yeah.
You have mentioned that, the regional countries want to be secure. They want to become NATO's members. And here I see the main contradiction of the post-bipolar era. It's the contradiction between nations' right to freely choose security alliances and NATO's right to oppose enlargement of security alliances if they are perceived as a threat. This is one of the main contradictions of our time, and it can be resolved only if we have a kind of new Helsinki II or Paris II, where we could resolve this contradiction.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Schwartz. I'm going to ask a sort of kind of unorthodox question in the sense that this morning we've heard a lot about the sort of NATO values, and there's a lot of talk about values, and in the past we used to use the word still do, Balkanization. I'm wondering whether what we've seen in Washington recently isn't a little bit of Balkanization and Balkan values being applied to the top in Washington. And is that something that we should be worried about? We're talking about being worried about Russia, but if the presidency effectively adopts a kind of Balkan values approach to politics, is that something that we should be worried about in the Balkans? Well, I'm not. I'm specifically using the word Balkanization, and the sort of. I'm talking about the kind of mixture of business and politics, and and I mean, alternate facts are something that we know about very well in this region, but we're less used to it in Washington.
Okay, so the election was definitely a stark difference from what we had been experiencing over the previous election cycle going back for many, many years. For the first time you had a populist move, the first time in many, many years, you had a populist movement come in and supplant the establishment candidates across the board. A very unusual development which had its roots in deep discontent in the heartland of the country, disillusionment with a lot of different things that have been going on for many years, the process of globalization, the feeling of the uneven playing field, some stirred up by mischaracterization of actual policies and the basis of those policies. I'm not going to get into specific details, but policies that had been passed became very unpopular because they have been targets of partisan attack from the other side, and there had been a growing gridlock within Washington as well. And so I see the election 2016 largely as a rebellion or a revolt against the status quo of what had been going on in Washington for many, many years. However, now that President Trump is in power, now that he has selected his cabinet, especially those involved in foreign policy and national security, I think is quite sound. And I don't think you're going to see a Balkanization, as you put it, or some kind of a divergence from the European pro-Western path that we've seen in the past. However, domestic policies still, we're going through a period of turmoil. In the U.S., we're looking at repealing the health care bill that was just passed 8 years previously. We're looking at tax overhaul. We're looking at a number of programs that are going to have a significant.
Okay, I mean, I was thinking of it in a different way. We've tended to kind of regard in a quite a sort of dim fashion when the families of Balkan leaders get rich because their husband or father or whoever or brother is in power. But maybe we're seeing that now in Washington, and therefore it becomes harder to talk about values. Yes, but sure. I'm talking about families. I'm talking about families in the White House. Okay. Do you want maybe?
I can spend maybe 30 seconds on that.
Yeah, do.
Limitation time. Okay, so certainly we're seeing an unusual president who's come into office, not with the usual accumulation of wealth in the form of stocks and mutual funds and financial assets, some real estate holdings, but somebody who owns substantial business assets, multinational, distributed, of a wide variety, and it's created some problems, perceptions of conflict of interest, and potentially actual conflict of interest. We're seeing efforts made to try to segregate some of the management of those assets from the political decision making. So not clear at this point whether that's going to be altogether successful. We've had some concern about that, but in terms of a wholesale change from the prior to some kind of a new oligarchical system, I don't see that happening.
Okay, Mr. BOŠKOVIĆ, like quickly, you're virtually the last word here.
About?
Well, whatever you'd like. I'm running out of questions. Like, you can have the last word.
Dakle, evo, pošto smo već probili termin za ovaj panel, želio bih samo da iskoristim ovu priliku zaista da se zahvalim svima koji su u prethodnih 11 godina radeći na euroatlantskoj integraciji Crne Gore pomogli nam da od sebe napravimo boljeg nego što smo bili i da poruka možda i ovog foruma bude da je Crna Gora samo jedna u dijelu onih koji će u narednom periodu ispuniti ove kriterijume i približiti se članstvu u Sjevernoatlantskom savezu, pogotovo kad je ovaj region u pitanju, jer opet ponavljam i mislim zaista da je krucijalno za ovaj region, a nećete mi se naljutiti što sam isključivo danas baziran na ovaj region, jer tu živimo i tu stvaramo porodice, a to je da bezbjednost i dugovječnost ovog regiona kao stabilnog regiona je isključivo naravno vezana za te euroatlantske integracije, jer je to se pokazalo kao putokaz stvaranja jednog dugoročnijeg, stabilnijeg Balkana.
Great. Thank you very much. That's it. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but like...